I want to welcome you and the guests who are here today to this special convocation, which we have arranged in order that we might honor the neighbors that Augsburg enjoys in this area. Before I go any farther, I just want to call attention to the fact that Pastor Nylene's presence here reminds us of the close association which has existed for decades between Augsburg College and Trinity Church. We're all aware of the fact that before long, Trinity Church will be moving out of its present building that it has had for almost 70 years, and that on the 17th of May, which is a rather important day for Scandinavians, the student body at Augsburg will gather for a special convocation in that church just 2 blocks from us on the 70th anniversary to the day of the laying of the cornerstone of Old Trinity. And on that day, the cornerstone will be removed because the last service by that congregation will be held on the last Sunday of May, Pentecost Sunday, and after that, the congregation will worship temporarily in the facilities provided by the Riverside Presbyterian Church until the congregation is able to build its new edifice on 20th and Riverside. The idea for this gathering today came really from Dr. Wilson at the university. He arranged such a convocation over there in connection with their Charter Day, when a few months ago they celebrated the 115th anniversary of the charter which brought the University of Minnesota into existence. He was not present personally at that convocation, so we're honored that you are here at ours, even though you weren't at yours. He was there via a filmed presentation, being on the way to South America on some other business, and at that time he dropped the hint that he thought it would be a good idea for the neighbors to try the same thing. And so that is what we are attempting today. And we think it's a very good idea to point up the fact that we do enjoy some wonderful associations by virtue of being where we are. I want to welcome this morning some guests, and then we will hear some greetings from our neighbors, and I want to simply introduce the following. The Reverend Keith Irwin, pastor of Riverside Presbyterian Church, is the chairman of the Cedar Riverside Area Council, a very important group which has set some goals and objectives for the development of this area, objectives which are now being considered by the City Planning Commission in connection with the plan which they seeking to develop for the Cedar Riverside area. And I'd like to present, and I wish you would greet Pastor Keith Irwin. He's really more than a neighbor, he's almost a relative because of the long association between Lutheran Deaconess Hospital and Augsburg College. And while not exactly in the area that concerns us in connection with the university community development, still is very much a part of the development of this area of Minneapolis. And we, of course, have some very fine connections with Lutheran Deaconess Hospital because nurses from that institution also study here at Augsburg College. Mr. Ward Edwards, the administrator. Will you stand, Ward? We enjoy also some fine relationships with business establishments in the community, and I've asked our good friend Mr. Wendell Olson, who is the president of the Fourth Northwestern National Bank, a member of the President's Advisory Board here at Augsburg College, and a representative of all of the commercial establishments in the area to be with us today, and I'd like to have Mr. Wendell Olson stand up. You have no doubt read about the formation of the University Community Development Corporation, and we are going to hear more about that from Dr. Wilson later on this morning. But one of the officers of that organization, the secretary, where are you, the treasurer? Secretary. Secretary of the University Community Development Corporation, Mr. John Holton, of the firm of Faegre and Benson, and also the counsel for this college, is here today, and I'd like to introduce Mr. John Holton. Then another neighbor that we hope will move in and take residence, so to speak, alongside of us is a Children's Hospital. And as you are probably aware, the site which has been chosen for Children's Hospital is right across 94 from the college, just across the pedestrian crossover. And we're happy today that Mr. John Stockwell, representing Children's Hospital, could be here. Mr. Stockwell. And now to some of our close neighbors and people with whom we are associated as we work together for the betterment of this neighborhood. I'm going to call, first of all, upon the Vice President, the Executive Vice President for Fairview Hospital, Mr. Carl Plato. Mr. Plato is busting his buttons these days because of the fact that Fairview Hospital's long-term care unit was mentioned in a recent issue of the Wall Street Journal. And there is only one glaring omission in that particular reference, and that is the fact that Fairview Hospital was not properly located in the article as being across the street from Augsburg College. I think I ought to introduce Mr. Plato not only as the administrator of this very fine hospital, which is a part of our family because its association is made up of American Lutheran congregations in this area, but I would want to introduce him also as the Commodore of the Aquatennial. And this also gives him some very interesting experiences. I'm going to call upon him for a brief greeting at this time. Mr. Plato.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. We're all good friends. Dr. Anderson doesn't tell about the time I drove him back from Minneapolis Rotary in the Commodore's car, and some students out here saw him get out of this flashy convertible which said Queen of the Lakes on the side. We're very honored to be with you, and I'll be most informal and just simply say that the growth and development of Fairview Hospital and also Fairview Southdale are very, very close to the heritage and initiation of what is also Augsburg College. We have very close ties. Our student relationships, our purposes are all very close in education. You are perhaps diligent but negligent in some of your responsibilities. I don't think you're aware or have paid much heed to the fact that Fairview Hospital's fourth child, born 50 years and 2 days ago, is Dr. Oscar Anderson. And if I may just paraphrase briefly the most sincere greetings from Fairview to you, and that as the program at Fairview continues to grow in width and breadth, may Dr. Anderson also.
I would much prefer height and depth to width and breadth. We're very happy to welcome this morning also, representing another one of our neighbors, Sister Mary Madonna, who is the administrator at St. Mary's Hospital. I think that one of the things that is happening is the fact that neighbors are really getting to know each other because of a common concern for the neighborhood. I'm reminded of the story of the young couple who moved into a particular neighborhood, and the young lady of the couple was watching the neighbors, and one morning she sat down to breakfast and she said to her husband, "Hubby, I've been watching the neighbors next door, and I noticed that when the husband goes to work, the wife always comes out on the porch and gives him a hug and kiss before he goes to work. Why don't you do that?" And he said, "Well, that's hardly possible. I haven't been introduced to her yet." Such a display of affection will not be necessary, but we certainly want to introduce our neighbors from St. Mary's. And I know that there have been some fine associations in the past, as some things have taken place with respect to closing of streets and changing of contours, as St. Mary's has broken out, so to speak, toward Riverside. And as this breaking out process takes place, I'm sure that we will greet one another even more warmly. But we're very happy that you're here today, and we'd like to hear a greeting from Sister Mary Madonna.
I was wondering what that story was going to lead up to. In case you missed Mr. Plato driving Dr. Anderson up to Augsburg, keep your eyes open because he's promised me a ride in that car too. It is a real pleasure for me to represent St. Mary's Hospital here this morning. In fact, for some time now, I've been looking for an opportunity to say thank you to President Anderson and to several of the other faculty members who have really gone out of their way to treat us as very warm neighbors and to create a spirit of good neighborliness. So this gives me an opportunity to thank Dr. Anderson as well as the many others of you who have extended invitations to us to be here and to participate in so many of your special events. These few minutes also permit me the opportunity to thank you Augsburg students who today, as well as in past years, have been good neighbors in the truest sense of the word. Many of our sisters and staff members can tell incident after incident in which you have gone beyond the call of duty to give service to our patients as part-time employees. The most recent memories that I have of such events naturally concern our recent snowbound disaster. Your generous response at this time when you were having examinations and still managed to come over and help us cannot be praised enough. It certainly speaks very well for the college which has inspired you with such Christian compassion. It's perhaps these examples of neighborliness that cause us at St. Mary's to be very mindful and recognize deeply the significance of the very progressive program which you are outlining in the future for Augsburg College. We at St. Mary's congratulate you on this progressive development program and wish you every success and blessing in achieving the goals which have been outlined so beautifully. We are looking forward eagerly to what this program and the coming events for your centennial will bring in terms of influence on our total community. Thank you.
Many people are not aware of an important educational development which is taking place very near to us in the development of and the progress of St. Mary's Junior College. It's been my privilege the last several months to meet with many groups of businessmen and leaders in Minneapolis and tell them a little bit about what's happening in this area. And almost without exception, they are surprised at the development of a junior college in this area. They were aware of the hospitals and the university and Augsburg College, but this development they are not so aware of. And I'm sure that as the months and years go by, we will become more and more aware of the fact that the nursing education and paramedical education which has been carried on at St. Mary's Hospital is now focused in the program of St. Mary's Junior College. We're happy, too, that the college is making use of some of our facilities here at Augsburg. I attended their honors convocation last year, and I understand that they're using Cy Melby Hall again this year for their honors convocation. We're happy to make these facilities available. Here representing the college is its president, Sister Ann Joachim, and we're happy to call upon her for a greeting at this time.
I suppose that everyone sometime in his lifetime, whether it's the lifetime of an individual or the lifetime of an institution, has occasion to realize the truth of the scriptural proverb, better the neighbor that is near than the brother that is far. And St. Mary's Junior College is in its very early developmental struggles, but already we've experienced the joy of the neighbor that is near, the neighbor Augsburg. Those of us that are in the university Community Development Corporation in the past several years in our common endeavor to improve and upgrade our own neighborhood. This is neighbors who are near, who are concerned with their own neighborhood, also have experienced a growing strength because we're near neighbors. As Augsburg begins to celebrate its 100th anniversary, may we bring congratulations and wishes of peace and joy, not only to Augsburg, who is the neighbor who's near, but in this really very exciting period of growing ecumenism, may we bring these wishes to Augsburg, our brother.
To call upon a representative from Luther Theological Seminary is to call upon a relative, a brother who is a little farther away than some of the other neighbors. In a sense, Luther Seminary is a relative of Augsburg College by virtue of the transfer or transplant or transfusion, however you want to look at it, made by Augsburg when the seminary department of this institution moved to Luther Seminary several years ago. Because of the fact that Luther Theological Seminary is adjacent to the St. Paul campus of the University of Minnesota, and therefore is a part of the total university community, Luther Theological Seminary is a part of this development program. And here today to speak on behalf of Luther Seminary is our good friend Dr. Alvin Rugnes, who has been over at Augsburg many times, but we're happy today that he's here in the capacity of a neighbor relative.
As a little poem, for this is the law of the jungle, as old and as strong as the sky. And the wolf who keeps it may live, but the wolf who breaks it must die. Like the creeper that girdles the tree trunk, this law runneth forward and back. The strength of the pack is the wolf, and the strength of the wolf is the pack. Now, I kind of dislike to use this particular animal as a parallel for the human situation. But there are three good reasons for being neighbors or for neighbors coming together. One is as the poem indicates, sheer survival. And while this isn't always a laudatory, nor a motive, nor one that draws out the best in people, it is quite necessary in order that the other two be realized, because if you don't survive, you can't go on to serve one another either, or together serve the world, which is the second reason why neighbors ought to get together. And I like to think that the reason this development has occurred in the complex of our educational institutions in Minneapolis and St. Paul is that a world that desperately needs the kind of service that educational resources can provide, that this is the world we're looking to and hoping by our neighborliness to help. And the third, which I think is also a laudatory reason, is that neighbors ought to know each other simply to enjoy one another, quite apart from whether they survive or do a great program of service. They ought to be privileged to know one another in order to enjoy one another. And it's been a great pleasure for me personally, and I know for the institution that I represent, to be more closely associated with our neighbors, Augsburg and the others, in the weeks that lie ahead and the months and the years. And as Dr. Anderson has said, I come not only as a neighbor but as a part of the family. By having the senior member of your community, namely the Theological Seminary, move over to St. Paul, we had to take on a new date of origin. So we celebrate our centennial at the very same moment that you celebrate yours.
Thank you, Dr. Rugnes. Thank you for living up to the tradition of a good Lutheran theologian with a three-point speech. We, I think, ought to enjoy in this neighborhood and in the Minneapolis and St. Paul area a little bit more cultural exchange than we do. All of our institutions have very fine organizations, musical organizations, drama organizations, and so on, and they arrange trips all over the country, and even to foreign countries, but they don't bother to really go across the street. I think it's rather significant that the group that has come over to us this morning from St. Mary's Junior College made a trip to Europe before they made a trip across the street. We're very happy that the St. Mary's Junior College Chorus would come across the street this morning and give us a number at this time under the direction of Mr. Roger Klaskens, who is going to lead the group at this time. We're looking forward to your number. For coming over here and being a part of our program today. In order that we might have a little better look at our neighborhood and some of the people who are concerned about it and some of the areas which we feel will need some attention and some of the possibilities envisioned for it, we have asked Dr. Elmer Learn, the Assistant to the President and the University Planning Coordinator, to present a few slides which he and Dr. Wilson have put together for other presentations, and they have kindly agreed to let us see these today. And so I'm going to call upon Dr. Learn to give us a look at our university community at this time via this visual aid. Will you greet Dr. Learn as he goes to the projector? Now I want to call upon the president of our great neighbor, the University of Minnesota. Dr. Wilson, as you know, is an historian. He has studied history, he knows history, he has taught history. But I think more important than anything else, he has learned some of the lessons of history. And one of the lessons that history has taught is that educational institutions have not always been as concerned about their environment as they should be. In a recent speech, Mr. John Gardner, the cabinet officer in charge of health, education, and welfare, made that particular accusation, that he thought the universities and colleges of this country ought to be making to the urban culture the kind of contribution that was made to the rural and agricultural culture of our nation in years past. But I'm happy that Dr. Wilson has spearheaded the movement which has resulted in the University Community Development Corporation. He has been its leading light and guiding spirit, and we're very grateful for what he has done to bring the neighbors together in an attempt to produce the kind of environment that these institutions, we believe, deserve. And so I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Wilson for some remarks this morning and to tell him that we are grateful also for his participation on our Centennial Commission here at Augsburg College. Dr. Wilson.
President Anderson, it's an honor to be here and to visit with you and the faculty and students of Augsburg. I should like to tell Sister Ann Joachim that there is some danger that I see in developing such a delightful chorus. I, as a young man, was told that the primary need when you wanted to make sure that an ill man recovered was to instill in him the will to live. I take it to be true, therefore, that by similar logic, the primary need of a society, if it wants to stay healthy, is to have the will to be well. And as a matter of fact, when I saw those young ladies come out in lovely costumes, I wasn't sure going to the hospital wouldn't be fun. I was also fascinated by the comment of President Anderson to his uncle, I presume, President Rognes, that he was pleased that he lived up to the Lutheran admonition to have 3 points in his speech. And those others of us who occasionally allude to the Scripture are aware that there are 2 magic numbers in the Scripture, 3 and 7. And I suppose what he really meant was that he was glad he'd chosen 3 instead of 7. You do, I'm sure, remember the businessman who was invited back to Yale to give a commencement address and began by saying, "My speech is divided into 4 parts." And he spoke for 1/2 hour on Y is for youth, and then the second half hour on A is for ambition, third for L for love, and last a half hour on E for education. Marched proudly to his seat, and one of the faculty turned to the others and said, "Wasn't that awful?" And he said, "Well, I thought so until I wondered what would have happened at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology." Over at the University of Minnesota, we have an absolutely indispensable man who is a member of Mr. Plato's board, who's a member of a board of a Lutheran college, and who is our vice president in charge of inventing money. There is never a day but what I am deeply grateful to him, and never a day in which I'm not a little surprised. And as people watched him operate in the several years that I've been there, they used to refer to him as our evangelical Lutheran Jew. Which called to mind a conversation that I had with one of my best friends in the Twin Cities very soon after I arrived. He is a member of the Jewish community. He is a man also of great stature here in the city. And at the time there was apparently kidding going on about the Minneapolis Club and the Standard Club. And he said, "Well, our club is much better than the Minneapolis Club. And it's in a much finer neighborhood. We don't have a Jewish organization across the street." It's that remark that I wanted to use as a comment about us as neighbors. My Lutheran vice president has always reminded me that it's important to refer to the Scriptures in any speech of 5 minutes or longer. And the scriptural reference I have at the moment is the one which says, "Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." The fact of the matter is that that passage is of tremendous importance in two ways. The simplest expression of the passage is the clearest one, that we do have an obligation to think bigger than ourselves, beyond ourselves, to the larger community to which we belong. But the implied story in that passage is one often forgotten or overlooked. You can't really love your neighbor unless you respect yourself. And the measure of how much you should love him is how much you respect yourself. And the first job, therefore, of a good neighbor is to do well enough with what is his so he won't untidy the garden of the man with whom or by whom he lives. It is, it seems to me, true that whether you're talking about wolves or people, the strength of the society is one, and the strength of one is the society. And the obligation of the one to the society is first to make sure that what he is, has, and does can honor the people that are nearby. One of the difficulties of educational institutions has always been that in trying to honor or maintain the environment in which they live, they have had to wrestle with an almost impossible problem of providing the resources for the constantly increasing demands of education, which not only grow in numbers that must be served, but in costs of the services provided, with the result that historically it is true that most universities, so burdened with trying just to be strong enough to justify their existence for students and for the future, have not had time to take account of the declining neighborhood in which they have lived. Almost anywhere I could take you in the United States, and certainly almost anywhere I could take you in Europe, you would discover that early on the apron of educational institutions, housing became tight because the people who came to study were not well-to-do. They needed quick, easy, cheap accommodation, with the result that unless care was taken, and it seldom was, then the environment declined, the housing depressed, and before long, the university did not seem to have cared for its neighbors. When first look about this community and at the buildings, the natural beauties which were illustrated on the screen had been taken by us, it seemed to be quite clear that we were so engaged in prosecuting the work of a university that we were almost unconscious of the fact that we lived on the edge of what was almost a breathlessly beautiful park. Almost. Nature intended it to be, but we, by being careless, had allowed it to develop otherwise. There were soon thereafter discussions of the university's needs and the university's neighborhoods, and it became certainly clear that we were only one of 6, perhaps one of 10 organizations that also had a stake in this area. And it also became clear that there was a difference between a neighbor and a person whom you lived near. You had to know a person to be a neighbor. And one of the great values of developing a university community corporation was to bring about an orderly, friendly, common conversation about a common area and its well-being. We have had a number of conversations. We all have some clear idea of what we hope will come. But until what Mr. Plateau and his board, what Mr. Anderson and his board, what the two sisters and their boards, what Mr. Rogness and his board, and what the university and its board have pooled their needs and expressed their requirements in this area, it's impossible for the citizens who also would like to live in a community to know for what to plan and how to plan it. And we're hopeful that a community development corporation can be the stimulus for us to pool our plans, to know not what each of us requires for parking, but what all of us together can need, and whether there are better ways to serve it. Not what each of us requires for faculty housing, but what all of us together need, so that it can be better provided for. There has been conversation, but in the good book there's another passage, and I think this speech is long enough, so I'm required to make 2 quotations. The other passage says, "Man cannot live by words alone, even if he's occasionally required to eat them." In consequence, conversation only about this area has to give way to some sort of formal preparation and action. I think it is true that the community corporation, development corporation, can provide the catalytic energy from which will grow something which every succeeding generation of Augsburg alumni will take increasing pride in. And I hope it will be true that not just the board and President Anderson, but the students who have a need both to live and to learn in the area will take an interest in seeing that the environment that includes their neighbors at St. Mary's and at Fairview and the University of Minnesota as an environment that cultured, attractive, educated human beings can be proud of.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. If you will note carefully the number of people called to this platform for this convocation, that number is 7, and you were the 7th. And that is the divine number of completion. I want to say in closing this convocation that Augsburg is indeed grateful for its neighbors. Martin Luther said in his explanation to the petition, "Give us this day our daily bread," let us also thank the Lord for good neighbors. They are a part of daily bread. We are pleased to have an opportunity to join forces with these neighbors in the mutual benefit of our institutions in terms of an improved neighborhood. And we pledge our cooperation, goodwill, and support to the institutions that are around us, to the business concerns, to the residents of the area, to the churches and other agencies that are concerned about making this educational, medical, and cultural complex what we believe it ought to be. Now, when we were invited, some of us, to the university for their charter day, when the feature was, again, the University Development Corporation, the university was kind enough to provide a large cake that was cut with great ceremony on the platform, and all the people were invited to come and have a piece of the birthday cake. In good Norwegian tradition, we are going to provide coffee. And if you would like to have a cup of coffee, we invite our guests and our faculty and others who may wish to turn aside in the lounge for that bit of refreshment. We want to say thank you to those who have been with us today. We appreciate your presence and your willingness to take this time. We're sorry that Mr. Leonard Ramberg, the chairman of our board, is out of the city. He would have liked to have been here. And Mr. John Pillsbury, the chairman of the Development Corporation, could not be here this morning. But for those of you who have come, we hope that it has been a worthwhile period, and thank you very much for coming.